The morning the HOA president chained my front door shut, she thought humiliation would finally force me to leave the neighborhood quietly. She did not realize I had already uncovered the secret buried beneath her perfectly manicured lawn and smiling charity photos. By sunset, the entire subdivision would learn exactly who had really been stealing from them for years, and I would make sure the truth arrived louder than any violation notice she ever taped to my door. My name is Daniel Harper, 55 years old, retired firefighter after 3 decades running into buildings everyone else desperately fled. I moved into Silver Creek Estates 12 years ago with my wife, believing quiet streets and trimmed hedges meant safety. After she passed from a sudden aneurysm, the house became quieter, but it still carried her laughter in every hallway. For years, I kept to myself, paid dues on time, and never challenged a single ridiculous rule. That changed when Vanessa Caldwell became HOA president and decided control mattered more than community or basic human decency. Vanessa was 48, polished, politically ambitious, and obsessed with presenting Silver Creek as the county's most flawless address. She drove a pearl-colored Range Rover and carried violation forms the way other people carried grocery lists. Her favorite phrase was property values above all, usually spoken while smiling like a pageant winner. The first warning arrived over something small: my late wife's wind chimes hanging quietly beneath the porch awning. According to Vanessa, their soft sound created an inconsistent auditory aesthetic within the shared residential environment. I removed nothing because those chimes were the last birthday gift I ever bought my wife. A week later, I received a $300 fine for failure to comply with Harmony standards. Then came citations about grass height, mailbox shade, and a flag bracket supposedly installed half an inch too low. I attended the next board meeting and calmly requested documentation supporting these selective enforcement decisions. Vanessa dismissed my questions and adjourned early, claiming my tone felt disruptive to community morale. The harassment escalated after that meeting, and suddenly contractors began appearing around my property without notice or permission. One afternoon, I returned from visiting my sister to find bright orange notices taped across every front window.
Awesome.
The HOA had declared my home architecturally non-compliant and scheduled corrective modifications at my expense. They cited faded trim paint despite the fact it had been professionally redone less than 6 months earlier. When I tried leaving for the hardware store, I discovered a heavy chain wrapped tightly around my front door handles. A laminated sign hung from the chain, reading restricted access due to unresolved community violations. My own home had effectively become a staged example for anyone daring to question Vanessa's authority publicly. Neighbors slowed their cars, staring silently, unwilling to risk becoming her next carefully selected target. I cut the chain with bolt cutters from my garage and documented everything with time-stamped photographs. Then I did what 30 years in the fire department trained me to do: investigate before reacting. I began reviewing public financial records connected to Silver Creek Estates and its supposedly transparent community improvement fund. Homeowners contributed nearly $400,000 annually toward landscaping, security upgrades, and emergency maintenance reserves. Yet the subdivision's entrance fountain had been broken for 2 years without any scheduled repair timeline. Security cameras at both gates were decorative shells, never connected to active recording systems. Landscaping invoices listed premium botanical installations that had never physically appeared anywhere in the neighborhood. I filed a formal records request under state homeowner association transparency statutes and demanded itemized expenditure documentation. Vanessa responded with a partial packet containing heavily redacted spreadsheets and unsigned vendor agreements. Something about the vendor names felt suspiciously generic, like placeholders created without imagination or oversight. So I cross-referenced the listed companies against state business registrations and tax identification databases. 2 of the 3 primary vendors did not legally exist within our state boundaries. The third company was registered to a post office box located less than 2 miles away. That box belonged to a small mailing center adjacent to a boutique owned by Vanessa's younger cousin. I requested surveillance footage from the store next door and quietly offered to pay copying costs. The owner recognized Vanessa immediately, collecting monthly envelopes from that same post office box. Each envelope appeared thick, and she always carried them directly to her Range Rover. I shared the footage with a forensic accountant friend who once audited municipal departments for fraud investigations. Within 48 hours, he identified patterns consistent with long-term embezzlement and falsified maintenance contracts. Estimated losses exceeded $1.2 million over 5 years of carefully disguised transactions. Vanessa had not only targeted my home, she had been draining every homeowner's pocket systematically. I contacted 3 neighbors I trusted, including a retired judge who valued evidence over rumors. We organized a private meeting and presented copies of financial discrepancies alongside the surveillance still images. Shock turned quickly into anger as they realized their retirement savings helped fund someone's luxury lifestyle. Together, we requested an emergency community assembly under bylaws requiring member review upon sufficient petition signatures. Vanessa attempted delaying tactics, claiming scheduling conflicts and procedural technicalities beyond our comprehension. But the signatures exceeded the required threshold, and a mandatory meeting date was set publicly. The night before the assembly, another chain appeared across my front entrance, thicker than the first. This time, a printed notice accused me of trespassing within a restricted compliance enforcement period. I left the chain untouched and instead called the county sheriff's department to file a formal report. Deputies arrived, photographed the obstruction, and documented unlawful interference with residential access rights. By morning, word spread that law enforcement had visited my supposedly non-compliant property. The community assembly filled the clubhouse beyond capacity, folding chairs lining every wall and hallway. Vanessa opened with a rehearsed speech about negativity threatening property values and collective stability. When she invited homeowner comments, I connected my laptop to the projector without asking permission. The first slide displayed annual dues collected versus documented neighborhood improvements actually completed. The second slide showed side-by-side comparisons of vendor registrations and non-existent corporate filings. Murmurs grew louder as images of Vanessa collecting envelopes flashed across the large clubhouse screen. I explained forensic accounting findings clearly, referencing transaction patterns and matching them to personal luxury purchases. A neighbor stood and confirmed she had seen similar envelopes exchanged during private driveway conversations. The retired judge summarized potential criminal statutes violated, including fraud, embezzlement, and document falsification. Vanessa attempted interrupting, but homeowners shouted for her to let the evidence finish speaking. Someone called the county prosecutor's office directly from the back row during the presentation. Within an hour, 2 investigators arrived, requesting copies of financial documents and surveillance footage. Vanessa's composure finally cracked when they asked about the post office box registration details. She claimed clerical confusion, then blamed a volunteer treasurer who had resigned months earlier. Unfortunately for her, that former treasurer was seated 3 rows behind me that evening. He stood calmly and stated he had repeatedly questioned missing funds before being pressured to step down. Gasps echoed through the clubhouse as homeowners realized intimidation had kept them silent for years. Investigators asked Vanessa to remain after the meeting concluded for further questioning regarding financial irregularities. By the following afternoon, a formal audit freeze was placed on every HOA-controlled account. Access to community funds required dual authorization, supervised by an independent court-appointed administrator. 2 weeks later, criminal charges were filed detailing over $1 million in diverted homeowner contributions. Vanessa's Range Rover was repossessed as part of asset recovery proceedings tied directly to misappropriated funds. The board dissolved under emergency provisions, and interim leadership elections were scheduled transparently. All prior violation notices issued within 18 months were suspended pending impartial compliance review. Homeowners received letters outlining restitution plans and revised financial oversight safeguards for the future. As for the chains, deputies returned them to me as evidence of attempted unlawful coercion. I mounted one section in my garage as a reminder that intimidation collapses under documented truth. The wind chimes still hang beneath my porch, ringing softly every time the evening breeze passes. No one has mentioned auditory aesthetics since the night the projector exposed everything clearly. Silver Creek Estates finally feels less like a staged brochure and more like an honest neighborhood. Sometimes neighbors stop by just to talk, no longer afraid of invisible fines or silent retaliation. The entrance fountain was repaired using properly audited funds, and real cameras now guard both gates. Property values did not collapse as Vanessa predicted. If anything, transparency made them stronger. I never intended to become the neighborhood whistleblower, only to protect my late wife's memory. But when someone chains your front door to hide their crimes, silence stops being an option. And every time those chimes ring at dusk, they remind this neighborhood exactly why the truth cannot be chained.